Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Unreal Engine LiveLink tutorial. In our last video, we installed the OptiTrack LiveLink plugin in both the engine and in LivelinkHub. If you missed that, be sure to check out our previous video. In this video, we will cover streaming from Motive, reviewing asset data, and navigating all of the content folders within the OptiTrack LiveLink plugin. Since my last recording, I have updated the plugin to our 5.7 v2 version, so be sure to download it and stay up to date as we move along. So to start, I just wanted to recap on some of the stuff that we talked about in the last episode. We're going to be using this take that I'm just in playback right now, and in this take, we have a couple of rigid bodies and 3 skeletons who are all using the 7-segment spine models. We've also got a trained marker set in here, and there's nothing too special about it. It just has 2 bones, basically. So in our streaming settings, the biggest thing that's important is first we enable streaming by clicking this enable option. And for me, I'm using loopback as my interface because I'm just recording everything on the same computer. And then the transmission type will be multicast. And the most important stuff for Unreal Engine specifically is we need to set the skeleton coordinates to local and the bone naming conventions to Unreal Engine. From here, we're basically good to go, and we don't really need to touch Motive until we get to the live stuff. In Unreal Engine, we can click add source and then OptiTrack source and just connect automatically. From here, you can see that all of our subjects have appeared in the LiveLink window, and it even tells us the IP we've connected to and shows us every single asset. Some troubleshooting steps with the connection of LiveLink that's important to talk about is some of the icons here. So you can see that the subject properties are operating normally with these green check marks, and you can see that our status says that it's connected. If I were to pause the take in Motive, you can see everything swaps over to this subject is invalid icon here. However, we do still have the status of connected. For some troubleshooting steps to point out, if there is ever a time that you see a status here that says data descriptions received, and you also see this subject is invalid icon, chances are there may be something wrong with how you've connected via your IP addresses, or maybe there's a network issue with your firewall that could be blocking the connection. This tends to happen when you're streaming across 2 different computers more so. Another issue is you could just not get a connection at all, and then you won't see any asset data at all. So let's go over some of the subject properties here. If you click any asset in here, you could see that it has some properties that are slightly different from asset to asset. If you click this view options button, you have the option to see static data and frame data. So this is pretty important when troubleshooting and making sure that your connection has been established properly. So let's look at static data. You can see that we have a property for each XYZ value of a single marker as its own property. This is basically what builds up all of the data to form the location of the markers. We also carry across the location of the object, and you can see that by going to frame data. So this transform information is updating in real time, and this is the location and rotation of the object in space. So currently in the take, the puck isn't moving at all, and that's the asset that we're looking at, the active puck, but it is still sending that data across. Let's look at an object that actually is moving. So I'll click this baseball bat, and you can see that this is updating a lot more frequently with much more drastic changes. The next thing I want to look at is the skeleton properties. So if we go over to show static data, you can see that we have some bone name properties here. So these bone names are pretty helpful because it actually tells us before we start tracking any of the assets in the level what the bone names are, how their parents work, and any other information that we're curious about here. We also include the markers as sub-properties within this asset as well, so you can see the XYZ location of each of the markers for this asset. If we switch over to show frame data, you can click this drop down and then click any one of these values, and these values tie to the bone name. So for example, the root bone would be index 0 here, and we don't have any data. It's actually just the origin of our take, which would be at 0, 0, 0. But we could look at the pelvis bone, which would be the first one technically in the skeleton, and then we could see that this is actually updating its values as the take continues to play. So if for whatever reason you want to evaluate if the data coming from Motive to Unreal Engine is correct and properly sent, then you could basically look at all of the data through these properties here. The same is said for trained marker set assets. So for trained marker set assets, looks like we have only a couple of properties, but this sends out the data pretty well. All right, so let's move on. I'll go ahead and boot LivelinkHub to show the same stuff. Okay, so now with LivelinkHub open, I'll go ahead and move kind of quickly here since it's basically all the same stuff, but you could still look at all the same subject properties. One thing I forgot to mention is that you can actually see the NatNet version that you're referring to based on what's coming from Motive here. So when we connected to Motive, we established a connection with a version number of 4.5. We also have the option to generate labeled markers or unlabeled markers. You can also enable timecode, which timecode will be super useful later down the line, but it's important to talk about it here because we can enable it and change it at our will. If you'd like, you could also add a buffer to the stream, meaning that we could delay the streamed data by however many frames that we input here. For us, we're going to keep everything as default for now, but we will come back to timecode provider sometime soon. If you'd like a super quick and easy way to visualize your data in the level, what you can do is you can click this button up here and then type in OptiTrack LiveLink Display and just click and drag this to your scene. From here, you're able to look at all of the asset data. So here we can see all of our skeletons streaming in. We can move this anywhere we want in the level in case we'd want to set dress for any reason. But we also get to see the markers, rigid bodies, even the trained marker sets. So this is a really useful way to visualize the data very quickly. There is a way to do this in Mocap Manager, and we will talk about that once we get to that episode. Within the OptiTrack LiveLink display, you can change any of the properties here. So if we wanted to change everything, we could change everything to blue. Or for example, if we only wanted to change rigid bodies to pink, we can do so as well. If we wanted all of the markers in our scene to be green for some reason, we could do that as well. But this has a lot of options for you to mess with and visualize your data, and it's a nice tool. The last thing I want to talk about in this episode is our LiveLink content folder. So to view this, what you'll need to do first is make sure that either engine content or plugin content are enabled, or both if you installed this to your engine folder rather than your plugin folder for the project. Probably best to just enable both of these. So in the plugins folder, go to the OptiTrack LiveLink content folder, and you can see that there's quite a bit of stuff in here. I'll go quickly over each of these assets. In here, we've got an active puck mesh, which is basically a 1-to-1 scale of our active puck. Now, the designs have changed a little bit, but it should be pretty useful for what you're looking for, and the overall specs haven't changed too much in terms of dimensions. We've also got a Cinepuck mesh here as well. This is 1-to-1 with our current wireless Cinepuck, so you can utilize this if you want some more visual data in your scene. We've also got some decals in here that probably aren't super useful, but it is nice to see that you can throw in a Motive icon or basically do whatever you want with these two logos. We also have some props in here. These props are props that we use at OptiTrack headquarters that we typically test with, so it's nice that we just have them in here. But we've also got this cool little OptiTrack camera that kind of just floats around once you press play in the game. Kind of cool. One of the coolest features that we've added for the latest version of the plugin is this Motive Asset Spawner tool. This tool's purpose is to simply add any Motive avatar or rigid body assets to your scene with just a click of a couple of buttons. But we will go over how to add these all step by step. Really quick, I'll show you how this works. If you drag and drop the asset into the scene, you can see that we've got no assets currently. But if you go into the properties, all you need to do once you've established an OptiTrack LiveLink connection is click Get Assets, and then you can do any of the options here. So for example, we'll just spawn all skeletons the same. And here we go. We have every single skeleton spawned in here and tracking and ready to go. The reason we have another skeleton just here in the middle of the scene is because this is using a animation role currently, and trained marker sets are also an animation role. So technically it recognizes that there are 4 quote-unquote skeletons in the scene, and if you wanted to circumvent that, what you could do is just destroy all the assets, and you could then type in the skeleton name. So for example, we'll just type Grace here, and then we'll say that this is a female mesh, and then we'll switch the color over to pink, and then we can say spawn skeleton from subject name. And once we get assets, and then spawn skeleton from subject name, we can see that those properties have been established and it has created the skeleton. We can also do the same for rigid bodies. So for example, if I typed in sword here, I can click on rigid body from subject name, and here we have our sword mesh. One more thing I wanted to point out, if you're working with capture stuff, you can also utilize capture skeletons in here as well. All you need to do is click this checkbox to enable capture skeletons, and then you could just spawn skeletons from subject name as well. I've also added in the functionality to enable a VCam as well. So what you could do is just type in the name of the rigid body VCam that you want to spawn in. So this could be something called VCam, but for me, I'm just going to use the sword object as the VCam. And once I click get assets, and we'll go ahead and spawn all skeletons the same, we'll also add a spawn VCam, and you can see it's added a camera as a VCam for that. So if this motive asset spawner seems interesting to you and you want to give it a try, go ahead and try it out in our newest plugin. It could be pretty helpful just to get a quick previs of stuff that you got going on in your scene. So the last folder I'll go over is the animation folder. Now the animation folder basically utilizes all of the animation blueprints, meshes, and other information that you saw just now in this motive asset spawner class. So opening this up, we have our 3-segment spine model, which includes a motive avatar for a female and a male. We also have FBX avatars in case you wanted to use FBX naming conventions. However, we strongly recommend that you use Unreal Engine naming conventions. This is just an option for old legacy content. In fact, the motive asset spawner class that we have here only works with a 7-segment model mesh, where that mesh lives here. So we have a different skeleton that has the 7-segment model, and we have a male and female mesh for that as well. And this animation blueprint motive avatar asset here is being referenced by the motive asset spawner. If you wanted to create your own, you could just make a new one based on this skeletal mesh or this one. You can see that with each skeletal mesh that we've added, we also included an IK rig for them as well. Opening that up and giving it a look at, you can see that everything is already in place for you to start retargeting your animation data. We tried to follow the metahuman conventions as best as possible, so feel free to give us any feedback that you find as you're working with this asset. And that's everything in the OptiTrack LiveLink content folder. In the next episode, we will be going over rigid bodies. Thanks so much for watching the video, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.